and also journalists, this isn't that scandalous. I mean, in 2016, in October already, the then Minister of State Security,
Yeah.
David Mahlobo, he mentioned in a panel discussion with the Institution of Security Studies that a number of claims which kind of pointed to this. He mentioned that there were fears that student movement was infiltrated by a third force. He mentioned that concerns that it was leading to violent protests, that some academics were teaching radical theory which encouraged violent protest, and also that there was military training being provided. So he was using these in that panel already to kind of justify the need for state surveillance. But as was responded to then, a lot of this is tenuous claim, suspicion with no empirical basis. And there's also no accountability in terms of to what extent does surveillance impinge on democratic rights, constitutional rights, and also just the agency of these movements to push progressive goals. So it's not surprising, but it's confirmation of what we suspected, and it's quite devious.
Yeah, and Simamkele, many people will try to be dismissive. I'm not suggesting that's what Mohammed is doing at all. But these kind of facts matter. I'm taken back to when Prof. Bongani Mayosi passed on at UCT. It emerged that he had been facing other challenges in his life, but among some of the reasons we were told why he might have committed suicide was because there were leaders in the movement accusing him of being some kind of spy, of being a sellout. These details matter, surely?
They definitely matter and should be taken seriously because there is a human cost to what was done. It's not in the past. It is still felt, not only in the lives that were lost, but also in the lives that were changed forever. Many have criminal records from the movement, from being activists in the movement. Many still face issues of addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol abuse, because of PTSD from participating in Fees Must Fall. Many's careers will never be the same again. So, and many have issues of mental health that they still struggle with. And so for me, I do not want us to move forward without accountability because the human cost of what was done is still felt.
Absolutely. Thabo, you were in a leadership position at the height of the unrest. In fact, my understanding is that you are SRC president at the University of Pretoria. Many are looking back in hindsight and saying, surely you should have known something. Is that fair?
Thank you very much for affording us this particular opportunity to engage on what we consider as an sensitive issue in higher education. Now, I mean, of course, like many other people have learned, they can inquire about, Project Academia amidst other revelations. I mean, 13.5 million already being revealed by David Mahlobo at the time in 2016, saying that they use that money to spy on students. So yes, we were mindful of the fact that students are being spied on. We were aware our phones were being tapped, families were being intimidated, and so forth. But it is shocking to hear, later, 5 years later, of Project Academia in and of itself, and not only just Project Academia. It's what Project Academia sought to do in the higher education sector. They identified what they consider to be young, bright minds. So not only are you undermining the rest of us who are protesting for what you consider to be a genuine cause, you identify what you consider young, bright minds, and then you deploy these young, bright minds into particular institutions, particular state institutions to destabilize the movement. We don't know what these institutions are. It could be members of parliament, the legislature, it could be higher education institutions, it could be boards, for example. So we're saying, like the previous speaker, Simangele, says that we cannot, because of the human cost to this issue, we cannot let the issue of accountability slide. More so because the state, through its own admission, is complicit of using apartheid tactics against the student movement. It's complicit of derailing students in their fight for free education in this country. It's complicit of the arrests that were made to students, of the expulsions that are made to students, of the trauma that students have suffered. Today, many students can't register because of historical debt. Today, many students can't register because they've been expelled from institutions. Meanwhile, we have individuals in the system who, through their own negotiations, through their own selfish negotiations, have with the state, have had their fees being paid, have had accommodations being paid, flights being paid, cell phones being paid. All of this has been revealed by Dr. David Mahlobo at the time, to say that they've identified these people and have spent quite an exorbitant amount. Who are these people? It's only fair that we ask for a list of these names to avoid targeted victimization. We are asking as a union through our NWC resolutions over the past weekend that we want a list. We want to go into an inquiry where that access to information, access to public information, that we want a list of these people, who they are, and exactly how did this operation manifest itself. Because today we have people who are victims of this particular Project Academia. It explains the police brutality. We are thinking we're fighting for free education and the state is protecting us, or the state is managing free education. Meanwhile, we are under a whole project called Project Academia, and we need accountability in that particular aspect.
Well, Thabo, part of the perception is that some of these people are actually part of the leadership body of the movement itself. I mean, this can't have been news to you. You able to hear us, Thabo? Right. It looks like our connection to Thabo is lost. Mohammed, let me bring the conversation back to you. What is perhaps of equal concern is that... Sorry, Thabo, it's okay. We'll come back to you. Mohammed, what is perhaps of equal concern is that there were individuals, seemingly, who were prepared to take this money and prepared to do whatever spying needed to take place. Individuals, perhaps, who found that the movement itself cannot guarantee their own protection. I mean, what reflections should we have to that aspect of the saga? You know, individuals who, in some respects, were, dare I say, victims of another form of oppression.
I mean, so it's difficult to comment on this without having an understanding of the context of the individual. There might be individuals who are, like most of the Africans in the country, are struggling at home, have a family to look after, and they're being promised fees, they're being promised things that will make the context of living better. So there might be that context. It might be a context of they were just after it for selfish personal gain. It's difficult to make these things, and it also inculcates a kind of culture of suspicion amongst individuals about who was involved, what were their intentions. And I suppose the difficulty is that there's no information, there's no public accountability, there's no sense of who or what or why and what purposes, and it continues to sow division like it did back when the movement was still active. Who's a sellout? Who can we trust? Who is working for the state? Who is in it for alternative measures? And there's also just this thing of using the third force, using the regime change narrative in order to shift accountability away from the fact that the state, the ANC in particular, aren't doing or making up for the promises that they already made. There's always a third force. There's always some sort of external agent that is apparently guiding things in the background. And now some of this has been confirmed. The third force here was actually the state. The students themselves were pushing for something that has been promised and is legitimate in its desires. And all of it comes from a kind of sincere place. Maybe we have differences about tactics and some of the strategies that we used. But in essence, directing a movement from an outside shadowy purpose is something that we would not expect from a state that is promising and making claims to accountability and doing its best.
Right.
So for me, yeah, that's my take at the moment.
Simamkele, of course, the movement itself wasn't without its own flaws. Internally, ironically, some of the oppressive societal structures that were being fought actually manifested inside the movement too. I wonder, do these revelations, do you think, work or go far enough to delegitimize what the movement was actually about?
So before I answer that question, I just want to share with your audience that we released this book. It's called Rioting and Writing, Diaries of the WITS 4 List, and it's free to access on the WITS swap page. So many students who are involved in the Fees Must Fall movement at WITS wrote their reflections on the movement, and this book was released in 2017. So I highlight this book because what was revealed at the State Capture Commission, we wrote about. We wrote about our experiences with how, for instance, the state and the governing party interfered in issues of the movement. I particularly wrote a chapter on this where I spoke about a hashtag that I started after we had disrupted a meeting held at Senate House, which is now known as Solomon Mahlangu House at WITS, which is the main building that we occupied during Fees Must Fall. So during the time of Fees Must Fall, there was a secret meeting held by ANC-aligned students as well as with people who were working for various NGOs, working for various government departments, even think tanks who were present in that meeting. So, for instance, we didn't know the meeting was happening because we're still occupying, Senate House as a student body. And in the many WhatsApp groups that we had, someone alerted us that actually there's a secret meeting currently taking place. That meeting included the former president's daughter, former President Zuma's daughter, who was employed as a chief of staff in one of the departments. In an unearned position. I'm sure that's very well documented in the media, but I just want to highlight that. So we started this hashtag called ANC Capture of Our Movement, and we saw the minutes of this meeting, and we documented it on social media, and there was a huge backlash, particularly directed at myself and many others. And we felt unsafe that we couldn't, sleep at our own residences when we spoke of, how our movement was being captured. And so for me, I'm highlighting this to say what is being, said at the commission, as well as, the high level report. We knew this, we experienced this, we felt this, and our voices were delegitimized. We were made to feel that we didn't belong in the movement because we were trying to divide the movement, when we're actually trying to say that our movement is being captured. And in fact, it was successfully captured. And I highlight in this chapter a particular moment where we decided to march to Luthuli House in a moment that was called Occupy Luthuli House, to form to some kind of accountability, to gain some kind of accountability, from the ANC as a governing party. So I'm sure there were many, that march was widely, covered in the media. But what we saw when we actually got to Luthuli House was what I reflect on in this chapter, is that we saw that this was another ANC political theater, or form of political theater, where the script was written before we actually arrived. I want us to say even the initiative to march at to Luthuli House was not supported by ANC-aligned leaders of the student movement, who have gained now position, in various institutions of government, who then used the movement and lied to students, because we honestly, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, we honestly believed in collective power, of collective non-partisan power of the movement.
Yeah.
Our t-shirts, our various political parties t-shirts left. Yet then, after seeing how the movement was infiltrated, we started seeing the division. And I want us to reflect on those moments truly, without,
and let me come in there.
Without sugarcoating anything.
Absolutely. And let me come in there. Thabo, you are part of the organizations that are widely accepted to be ANC aligned. In fact, my understanding is that when you were SRC president at UP, you did so as part of the PYA, which is understood in part to be the ANC leg, or the ANC branch among students. Optics matter. History will look back at this moment and perceptions will be made. And part of the perceptions that are even emerging now, dare I say, is that the alignments even back then were problematic and in part led us to where we are now. What's your response to that?
Look, I think firstly, one needs to take a very nuanced reflection around the Fees Must Fall movement. By and large, I think Simamgele's of Fees Must Fall within the context of Wits University. And it's important to highlight this part. More often than not, we have tended to say, speak of Fees Must Fall, we assume that we are talking about the country's politics in terms of the country's fees must fall, whereas what she's referring to is the protest that started on 14 October at Witwatersrand University. The fight, so we need to nuance these things. The hashtag Wits Fees Must Fall starts at Witwatersrand the 15th of October, 14th of October, and that's what she's speaking to. But the Fallist movement took different forms across different institutions. It's not a national movement, and I think that is part of why we failed to achieve the broader national appeal. There was no national directive force that was running a Fees Must Fall from a national level. It was happening according to our institutions. For instance, at the University of Pretoria, we had what we call the UP Rising was the movement. The social movement formed there was UP Rising. Amongst UP Rising, you had a collective, what was called the Central Committee, I think, constituted of 5 members of SASCO, 5 members of EFF, 5 independent students, and that was the governing organization of School at the University of Pretoria. So it's very important when we speak about the PYA and how we brand them in and of itself. It's not branded as if there's a national sanctioned approach. Different things were happening across different institutions. Even this thing of saying that Project Academia, that there were spies, right? What we must be asking and I think I come in from a lens of a national organization, the South African Union of Students, is to say that from a national perspective, we need to begin to ask what was happening at different institutions. At WITS, the issue was about fees and decolonisation. At the University of Pretoria, the issue was about Afrikaans falling, the language, something that they would not necessarily experience at WITS University.
Right.
So when we say that during this process, we've had Project Academia, how has that manifested across different institutions? Across different campuses. It's very important to highlight that nuance.
All right. So many questions still to be asked, and this is, the perception I get is that we're far from actually ascertaining what happened. Perhaps a good note to leave it on, and a note to invite you to come further ventilate these issues at the next available opportunity. For now, let me thank you all for your time. Mohammed Abdullah, Simamkele Dlakavu, as well as Thabo Shinganye. All 3 of you, thanks very much indeed.